Tell me, what matters most to you in your life in this present day?
My friends and family are probably the most important things in my life right now. Nature is also really important to me, so spending time in nature and seeing wildlife, dancing and listening to music are also things that are very important to me.
And if you were to get an illness which might shorten your life at some point, would those things change at all?
Friends and family would still be really important to me. I would like to be able to spend as much time with them as possible. I would also like to feel like I'd made a difference in the world, I think.
We often make advanced care plans only once we become ill, or sometimes when we are too ill to properly think about what we want for the future. They can be rushed, they can be done in high-tension situations, and what we really should be doing is the exact opposite, is thinking throughout our lives, at each stage in our life, is where do we go from here? What's next? Have my attitudes changed through time? Have my wishes changed through time?
There's actually a lot of consensus now on what effective advanced care planning looks like. So we know it should be individualised. It is actually about that ongoing conversation over time, revisiting decisions and talking about preferences and goals in a more person-centred way. We can then compare that to what actually happens in practice, which is often, unfortunately, much more of the sort of box-ticking, form-focused way of doing advanced care planning.
This is not about forcing a conversation and upsetting people. It is not about trying to get a form signed so that you've completed your medical bit. This is about trying to understand what makes people tick, what matters most to them, what's important to them.
I don't believe that just establishing a medical record with somebody's preferences can ever do the job.
It shouldn't be a tick box scenario. It shouldn't be this is somebody's life, it's their wishes. It's a huge part of tying everything together about who they are, what's important to them. It can't just be tick tick.
It doesn't just have to be about death and dying. It's not about those last days. It's how would you like to live? You know, what are your wishes for the future? And we often talk around kind of having a plan for if everything goes well, and then what happens if things were not to go so well. I would say not talking about it does make it harder. And when you do talk about it, often it gives you a kind of sense of relief. You don't have to keep revisiting it.
Conversations are a process. You pick them up, you put them down, you get interrupted, you have a cup of tea, you decide that we're going to talk about something else for a while.
Sometimes you know when it's enough to stop. I often use the phrase, you know, we talk about it today and we'll put it in the box. And if you feel that that's enough for that box today, we'll open it the next day.
I think the key word is to be curious. So to go into the patient, especially if it's a new patient, with curiosity. So one is asking the question, what are they going to make of me being at the bedside? And a patient may ask lots of questions within a conversation, and that may be an indicator of their anxiety.
Don't think about having a difficult conversation. Think about actually having a person-centered, focused conversation and actually develop trust and think about what it is that makes that person live well. What is it that's important? What matters to that individual?
I ask a patient what their occupation is or what they used to do, perhaps what hobbies they value. And if a patient lets you into that very private part of their life, then I think you can really find out more about them and what their preferences towards the end might be.
We want to know what your top 3 priorities are. Even though I might be chomping at the bit to deal with your pain, it may be that you've got a dog that you're much more worried about than the pain, and I need to listen to what your worries are. And as long as I address those worries, it gives me that space to say, we're going to address this, this and this because they're worrying you most, but can we come back to these other matters that you've also raised that I think I might be able to help you with too?
Listen, listen, listen to what really matters.
Let people speak to you. Don't be afraid of people taking time to process a question, give people time, because these aren't easy questions.
Don't be afraid to include children within those discussions as well. It can feel scary, but children are incredibly resilient, and they understand much more than we think that they do.
It's really difficult just to have a conversation face to face. So we're creating ways that people can interact with things, maybe objects or art, and it really does just open people up.
As a GP, starting with a conversation about what matters most to people and those important to them at different points in their life and how they can live well feels natural. In my experience, traditional conversations about advanced care planning will happen naturally as a consequence.
I use a lot of humor. I'll probably start off by saying, oh, do you know how easy it is to kick the bucket? I can leave this morning, leave my house and just die crossing the road. That's how easy it is. And, have you ever had thoughts about that? And usually I'd call it an icebreaker, wouldn't I? Then the patient would say, oh, you're so right. It doesn't mean that because you've got cancer, it means, that you're going to die. Of course, you can die of so many things. And, that leads me to actually saying, well, perhaps, do you have any thoughts about that?
Don't forget that the dying person has been like you. Remember the human in front of us and not the condition or the medical need.
It's not for everybody. There are certain cultures that don't discuss or engage in end-of-life conversations because of their religion and what they believe in.
For Japanese people and for Chinese people, a lot of Chinese people, to speak directly about your own end-of-life care needs is not the custom. It's not the culture. These things are commonly, not always, but commonly referred to the children, and particularly the son. And in Japanese society, the eldest son.
I think it should be lifelong, but I think it's hard. You need a trigger often. You need a kind of a catalyst to have these conversations. I think there could be key triggers, such as when you make a will, or when you make decisions about guardianship of children, or when you take out a mortgage, or when you retire.
Looking at what's just happened or what's happened recently, how would you feel about if that happened again? If you've just come out of hospital, you've just had a nasty chest infection, if that happens again, what would you like to happen?
Quite often by the time perhaps we see patients here, these are conversations that could have been had weeks ago, months ago, as just part of their care, and it wouldn't perhaps be so daunting if the conversations were more normalised and we were having them.
I think GPs should be encouraged to do that. They've known patients for a very long time.
There may be circumstances in which it's not appropriate to do it. If I've not met someone, picking up the phone and necessarily asking a question directly is not necessarily that helpful. It may be needed.
These conversations should be part of our lives. They're not easy, and death is hard, and bereavement and loss are lifelong, and they sit very heavily. And the fear, I think, of confronting that loss means that people don't want to go there whilst people are living. And I think that's so understandable. But the pain of not going there is so much greater. And I think that's what we need to share with people, that you can do this in a kind of a light way. First of all, you can just begin touching on some of the things that you wish for your later life.
One of the things I find myself saying to families often is that the effort that they put into the care of somebody before they die will pay dividends in the process of adjusting and feeling their grief afterwards.
Actually, what people really want to know is how can they live well right up until the very end? And if we can talk about that in the first instance, it means that we can direct our care towards those things that are most important for people.
Talk to your families about things. There's no stigma, and we need to make this a bit more global and raise awareness, really. Dying can be a beautiful thing if it's done properly.
There is a lot of love and a lot of hope in these conversations. And I think it's really getting that message across and being able to get advanced planning on a new footing. And that footing about love and hope is where the future lies for advanced planning.
If you talk about life and what people like and what they enjoy, you can get such a good feeling about who they are and what they want and what their greatest wishes are, but also what their fears are. And I think if we can get to that point and not too narrowly focus on some aspects that we find are important in medicine, then I think we're onto a winner here.
I've got 3 friends. One is keeps on saying don't. Don't. And the other one says I understand.